The crystal glass in my husband's hand trembled, the deep red wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. His face, usually a mask of cool corporate control, was a twisted canvas of drunken rage. He leaned across the table, his voice a venomous hiss that cut through the elegant hum of the restaurant. "You want your anniversary present, Amelia? Here it is. I have secretly, profoundly, and completely hated you since our wedding night." He sat back, expecting me to shatter. He didn't expect. Miss only a smile. Our 10th anniversary dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Julian, my husband, had been simmering with a quiet rage all evening. To the outside world, we were a portrait of success, the handsome heir and his elegant wife. But in the silent spaces between the clinking of our forks and the pouring of the wine, our marriage was a cold, empty room. I had learned long ago to be the calm, unbreachable wall against which he could hurl his moods. He took my silence as weakness, as he always did. "A decade of this charade," he sneered, his words slurring slightly. "A decade of being trapped in this business transaction. Because we both know that's all this has ever been." I simply adjusted the napkin in my lap, my expression serene. Inside, my heart was a steady, patient drum, counting down the final moments of the 10-year plan. Have you ever had to play a part for so long that the mask starts to feel like your own skin? For 10 years, I was Amelia Davenport, the poised, passionless wife. It was a role one played with Oscar-worthy dedication. He never once suspected that behind the vacant smiles and polite nods, a completely different woman was watching, waiting, and taking notes. His frustration grew with my calmness. He needed a reaction, a crack in the facade. That's when he leaned in and delivered his anniversary present, the confession of his decade-long hatred. He sat back, a cool, triumphant smirk on his face, waiting for the tears, for the drama. He was expecting the collapse of the woman he thought he knew. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, and then I gave him a small, calm smile. The smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What's so funny?" he demanded. "Nothing's funny, Julian," I said, my voice still soft, but with an edge of something he'd never heard before. "I'm just appreciating honesty. It's a refreshing change." He was a man who understood power and weakness, not serenity. My unexpected composure made him reckless. "You think this is a joke?" He spat. This whole marriage was a lie, a deal brokered by our fathers to merge the family empires. Or were you too naive to even realize that? "I knew," I said simply. The two words landed with the force of a physical blow. He stared at me, utterly lost. You knew?" "Of course," I replied. "It was a necessary sacrifice for the good of our family's legacy, or so I was told. It's a powerful thing, to hold a truth that can dismantle someone's entire reality." He had spent a decade believing he was the tragic hero of our story, the man who had sacrificed everything. To find out, I was a willing participant in the arrangement, stole his favorite role from him, the victim. And a man like Julian doesn't know who he is without his grievances. He tried to regain control, to reclaim his narrative of suffering. "It doesn't matter," he insisted, his voice rising. "I was the one who truly sacrificed. I gave up the only woman I ever loved for you for this. I gave up Isabella." He said her name like an incantation, a spell meant to wound me. Isabella, his fiery, passionate, and unsuitable childhood sweetheart. The ghost that had haunted our marriage from the very beginning. He was waiting for me to show a flicker of jealousy, of pain. He was about to be very disappointed. "You're right about one thing, Julian," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through his self-pity. "This marriage was a sacrifice. But you weren't the one who made it." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a bank statement from 10 years ago. I slid it across the table. "You didn't give up Isabella for the empire," I said quietly. "You sold her for $2 million. And I have the receipt." Julian stared at the paper, his face turning a sickly, waxy white. The statement showed a wire transfer of $2 million from a holding company owned by his father into an account under the name of Isabella Rossi. The tragic hero narrative he had wrapped himself in for a decade had just been shredded. How did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I have my sources," I said, my voice still calm. "I've had 10 years to cultivate them. 10 years of being the quiet, invisible wife no one pays attention to. It's amazing what you can learn when people think you're just part of the furniture." He shook his head, trying to process the information. So you've known all this time? You knew I was paid to leave her? I've known since our first anniversary, Julian, I replied. But that little secret? That was never the one I was interested in. Your petty heartbreak was just collateral damage. There is a certain kind of man who believes he is the main character in every story. Julian was that kind of man. He couldn't conceive of a world, a plot, a motivation that didn't revolve around him. His affair, his sacrifice, his pain. He thought it was the central drama. He had no idea he was just a minor character in a much older, much darker story. What are you talking about? He asked, the confusion in his eyes now laced with a new fear. I'm talking about the real business deal, Julian. The one that happened long before our wedding. It was time to tell him the real story. Not his, but mine. You see, you're right that our marriage was a business deal, but you were wrong about the terms. You thought it was a merger. It wasn't. It was a hostile takeover. And it began 20 years ago. I told him a story he had never heard. A piece of his own family's history that his father had carefully and brutally erased. I told him about my father, Alistair Croft. He had been a brilliant innovator, the founder of a small but revolutionary tech company. His biggest rival was a ruthless old money behemoth, Davenport Industries, run by Julian's father, Marcus. Your father couldn't compete with my father's innovation, I said, so he decided to steal it. He initiated a hostile takeover using every dirty trick in the book. Insider trading, corporate espionage, spreading false rumors to take my father's stock price. He bled my father's company dry, bought it for pennies on the dollar, and then dismantled it, absorbing its patents and technology into his own empire. The Davenport tech division that made your family billions? That was my father's life's work. Your father stole it. The takeover didn't just destroy my father's company, it destroyed him. He was ruined, financially and professionally. The stress led to a massive heart attack. He died when I was 16, a broken man who had lost everything to the ruthless ambition of Marcus Davenport. Before he died, I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, he made me promise him one thing. He made me promise that I would never let Marcus Davenport win. That one day I would find a way to take back what he had stolen from our family. Julian stared at me, his face a mask of dawning horror. He was finally beginning to understand. So when your father, years later, proposed a marriage alliance between our families, I saw it for what it was, I said. It wasn't a punishment. It was an opportunity. It was an invitation to walk right into the heart of my enemy's fortress. You weren't my jailer, Julian. You were my key. For 10 years, I had played the part of the perfect, docile wife. I was invisible, overlooked, underestimated. No one paid any attention to the quiet woman who sat in on board meetings, who organized her husband's files, who made polite conversation with his business partners at dinner parties. They saw a pretty, empty-headed socialite. They didn't see the woman who was meticulously gathering evidence, copying documents, recording conversations, and building a case, brick by painstaking brick, that would expose the rot at the heart of the Davenport empire. Your hatred for me, I said, a small, sad smile on my face, was the most useful tool I had. It made me invisible to you. While you were busy feeling sorry for yourself, busy resenting the woman you were forced to marry, I was busy orchestrating the downfall of the man who destroyed my father. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. For 10 years, I had been preparing a feast. Every polite smile was a sharpened knife. Every feigned disinterest was a carefully laid trap. He thought our marriage was a cold, empty room. He was. Right, it was my war room. I had spent a decade becoming an expert on Marcus Davenport's criminal enterprise. The offshore accounts, the illegal stock manipulation, the political bribes. I had it all, and I had been slowly, patiently feeding it to a team of investigative journalists and a very interested contact at the SIS. I didn't hate you, Julian, I said, and it was the truth. I pitied you. You were just another one of his victims, a son so desperate for his father's approval that he sold his own soul for it. My war was never with you. It was with him. I glanced at the elegant, diamond-encrusted watch on my wrist, a 10th anniversary gift from Julian that had arrived that morning. In fact, I said, if my timing is correct, the war should be just about over. As if on cue, my phone, which was sitting on the table, buzzed. It was a text from a number I knew well. It contained a single sentence, "The Eagles have landed." I looked up at my husband, at the man whose life was about to be completely and irrevocably destroyed. It seems, I said, my voice soft, that federal agents are currently executing search and seizure warrants at your father's office and at his home in the Hamptons. I imagine the news will be breaking any minute now. The transformation of Julian's face was a slow, agonizing spectacle. The anger, the resentment, the self-pity, it all dissolved, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock, which then gave way to a dawning, horrified comprehension. He was looking at me as if for the first time, not as his boring, passionless wife, but as the architect of his entire world's implosion. You did this? He whispered, the words barely audible. You destroyed my family? No, Julian, I corrected him gently. Your father destroyed his own family and mine. I just turned on the lights so the rest of the world could see the truth. His phone began to buzz violently on the table, the screen lighting up with his father's name. He stared at it, paralyzed. Then another call came through from his company's head of legal, then another from his cousin. The digital world was catching up to the reality that had just detonated in this quiet, expensive restaurant. He finally fumbled for his phone. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He scrolled through the news alerts, his face growing paler with every headline. Davenport Industries raided by feds in massive fraud investigation. CEO Marcus Davenport taken into custody. Stock plummets as decades of corruption alleged. He looked up from his phone, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading confusion. My company, my inheritance, everything. It's all gone. It was never yours to begin with, I said. It was all built on a foundation of lies and theft. A structure like that is bound to collapse eventually. I just helped it along. He stared at me, the last vestiges of his arrogance crumbling away, leaving behind the terrified, lost boy who had always been hiding underneath. What about me? He asked, his voice the small, weak voice of a child. What happened to me? That, Julian, is entirely up to you, I said. I reached into my clutch again and pulled out a second document. It was a postnuptial agreement I had had my lawyers draft years ago. A document that separated all my personal assets, the inheritance from my own family that I had carefully protected and grown, from the Davenport fortune. He had signed it, without even reading it, dismissing it as one of Amelia's little projects. Our marriage is over, I said, my voice clean and final. I have protected my own assets. The Davenport name, the name you were so proud of, is about to become synonymous with disgrace. You have a choice. You can go down with your father, or you can try to build a life of your own, for the first time, without his money and his influence. Stood up, my movements graceful and unhurried. I placed a single, crisp $100 bill on the table. For the champagne, I said. Consider it a severance package. I walked away from the table, from the man who was now just a ghost in the ruins of his own life. I didn't look back. As I walked through the restaurant, heads turned. The news was already spreading, whispers and flickering phone screens rippling through the room. They were no longer looking at me as Julian Davenport's quiet, elegant wife. They were looking at me as the woman who had single-handedly brought down an empire. When I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in 20 years. The weight of my father's death, the burden of my promise, the heavy cloak of my decade-long deception, it all lifted. I was no longer defined by my past, by my grief, or by my marriage. A black car pulled up to the curb. My driver, a man loyal to me and not to the Davenports, opened the door. As I slid into the back seat, I saw a news van screech to a halt in front of the restaurant, a reporter already jumping out, microphone in hand. The circus was just beginning, but I wouldn't be there to watch it. My part in the story was over. The months that followed were a whirlwind of headlines, court cases, and the spectacular public implosion of the Davenport dynasty. Marcus Davenport, faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, racketeering, and insider trading. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. The company was dismantled, its assets seized and sold off to pay a mountain of fines and restitution. The Davenport name was now a curse, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms of Wall Street. Julian, to my surprise, did not go down with his father. He cooperated with the investigation, telling the authorities everything he knew. He was spared prison, but he lost everything else. His name, his fortune, his social standing. The last I heard, he had moved to a small town in the Midwest, working a quiet, anonymous job. He had, in the end, chosen to try and build a life of his own. I found that I felt no hatred for him, no desire for his suffering. I simply felt indifferent. He was a chapter in a book I had finished reading. Forgiveness is a complicated word. I don't know if I'll ever forgive what his family did to mine. But I realized that my revenge was never about destroying Julian. It was about reclaiming my own power. In the end, he was just collateral damage in a war he never even knew he was fighting Dottis for me. I did not retreat into the shadows. I stepped into the light. With the Davenport Empire gone, a power vacuum was created in the financial world, and I was perfectly positioned to fill it. I used my own considerable fortune, the one I had so carefully protected, and the knowledge I had gained from a decade inside my enemy's fortress, to launch my own venture capital firm. I called it Craft Industries in honor of my father. My mission was different. I didn't invest in the ruthless, old guard companies that had defined the Davenport's world. I invested in the innovators, the disruptors, the brilliant young minds with world-changing ideas, people like my father. I became a builder, not a destroyer. 1 year after that fateful anniversary dinner, I stood on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I was there to ring the opening bell, an honor bestowed upon me as the CEO of the fastest growing and most respected new firm on the street. The crowd of traders below was a sea of faces, the roarous symphony of ambition and commerce. I looked up at the giant screen, where the Craft Industries logo was displayed, a stylized phoenix rising from the ashes. I thought of the quiet, grieving girl who had made a promise to her dying father. I thought of the silent, invisible wife who had moved to her enemy's world, gathering secrets. And I thought of the woman I was today, a woman who had not just reclaimed her family's legacy, but had built a new one, stronger and more authentic than any empire built on lies. Someone in the crowd below shouted my name. I smiled. It was a real smile this time, wide and genuine and free. The lie was over, the debt was paid, and my own story, the one I was finally writing for myself, was just beginning.